Are you confused by all the verb tenses? The past, the present, future, subjunctive, imperative? Don't worry, in this video I'll explain exactly when each verb tense is used. My name's Hamid, I'm 16 and fluent in these languages. I became fluent in Spanish after just 120 hours of studying, and now I get people fluent fast.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how every verb tense fits together and exactly how to never mix them up again. You see, when I started learning Spanish, the way I learned these tenses was not through the regular method of specifically learning them through their actual names. Because if you're watching this video, let's just be honest, we don't know what the fuck imperative means. Like, we probably know what like present tense and like future tense are, right? But have you ever heard of the subjunctive, like in English in your regular day life? No. And so the system is purposefully just super unintuitive. It's not intuitive at all. So the way I personally teach Spanish in my Spanish program, so you know that I practice what I preach, and also the way that I learned Spanish myself was through expressing the tenses in a way that I could understand, okay? And so this table comes directly from my fundamentals course, where I show you the exact meaning of each tense, okay? And so let's go through every single tense in Spanish. And so there are about 7 tenses in Spanish that most people get confused with. And so I'm going to explain them in the order that makes the most sense. So the first tense in Spanish is the present tense. And there's actually 2 present tenses. So the present tense refers to, for example, I speak or I am speaking, okay? And so when you think of the regular hablo, hablas, habla, hablan, etc., this is what we're thinking about, okay? It is I speak, but also I am speaking in this case. So it's both the present tense, which we all understand, I speak, I eat, I run, etc., or you run, you eat, you, whatever, but also the ing version. And this is what a lot of people don't talk about, okay? The present tense also includes the ing version. And so hablo means both I speak, but also means I'm speaking, okay? And natives use this all of the time. In fact, you might have heard of voy a, which means I am going to. It's proven right there. Voy means I am going. Okay, voy is the present tense though. And so voy means I go or I'm going. In the same way that hablo means I speak or I'm speaking. And so verbs in Spanish, just the base form of verbs, translate to, for example, to speak, but also speaking. It translates to both the to version, but also the ing version, okay? And so this matters a lot because there are 2 ways in Spanish to say I'm speaking, for example. I'm going to use that example because everyone knows what hablo means, right? So in Spanish, to say I'm speaking, you can either say hablo, which is the regular present tense, or you can say it word for word, which is estoy hablando. And so the difference between this present tense, which is what we'll call present tense number 1, for example, obviously there are names for it, and the second present tense, which is just the word for word translation of it, okay? And here's the difference. In English, a lot of the times we'll use the ing version when it's not relevant, like when it doesn't seem like it makes sense. Because think about it, the ing version, right, this ando ending that we have here, okay? Or in this English ing, right, ing, it is obviously referring to in that moment. Right? If I say I'm speaking, you're referring to in this moment right now. But for some reason in English, we'll sometimes use the ing to talk about other tenses, right? Think about it. If I asked you, are you speaking at this event? And then you said yes. Notice how I used the ing form, yet I was referring to the future, right? And so you can imagine that the ing ending for verbs are used both in generalities, where we refer to the present tense, but also other tenses, just in a general sort of sense. And then there's also the literally in this moment sort of sense of ing, okay? And so in English, they're both in the same ing ending, but in Spanish, they're differentiated through the present tense, and then the present tense where it directly translates to I am or you are or whatever with estar, and then also you conjugate the verb with ando for adverbs or yendo for adverbs, okay? And so in Spanish, when you specifically say estoy hablando, you're referring to in this moment right now. Okay, and so I like to give this example of if I was your roommate, okay, and I just found your cookies in the fridge or whatever, and you called me and you asked me, hey, are you eating my cookies, okay? If I said, sí, estoy comiendo tus galletas, which means, yes, I'm eating your cookies, that would mean I would have to have a cookie in my mouth while I'm saying that sentence. Whereas if I just said, como tus galletas, or in this context, someone might use the past tense, but if I'm just saying, yes, I'm eating your cookies, okay, sí, como tus galletas, that would be referring to a more general sense of, yes, I'm eating your cookies. And so that would be, for example, if you called me and said, oh, are you eating my cookies? And I said, yeah, I'm eating your cookies. And then you walk to the fridge. Do you see how the difference is? When you use the estar plus ando yendo form, or the second present tense, you're referring to in that moment right there where you're having the cookie in your mouth, right? Whereas if I said, yes, I'm eating your cookies and then I walk to the fridge, then I'm referring to a more general ing. Even though I'm still saying ing, I'm still saying eating. And so this is actually better in Spanish because there's a way to distinguish those two present tenses. And so that's the present tense, okay? Use it in the present. Everyone knows that. And by the way, if you're just getting started, I highly recommend checking out the Speedy Spanish Roadmap, which is a free course I made to help you start learning Spanish with these frameworks. And it'll be the first link in the description. Now, the next one I want to talk about is normally known as the conditional, but I will not call it the conditional because that's kind of confusing and not many people know what that means. I just call it what it actually means, which is the would tense. So in Spanish, to make verbs, I'm going to use hablar because that's the same verb we've been going with. Making a verb into the conditional tense means we put it into the would tense. And so what that means is taking hablar, and that means adding something, okay? So for example, ella, hablaría. And so this would mean I, he, she, it, or you formal would speak. As you can see how this tense is used specifically in sentences where we say would, and it's used 100% of the time. So that's why it makes no sense to call it the conditional. Okay, sure, it is used in certain conditions, so that might make sense. But let's just be honest, you speak English and you know the word would, okay? So you know that, okay, a verb into the would tense, as in I would, you would, blank verb. And so it's much easier to think that it's just would tense, which it is, okay? Now, one caveat here is that words like should and could also fall into this tense. And this is actually seen linguistically through this ud ending, okay? And this is actually interesting as well. And this also proves why it's easier to understand it as would tense. Because should in Spanish is debería, okay? And deber is to must, okay? And so if you think about what should means, should just means must would. Like it's putting together the verb must as though like you must do this and just putting it into the would tense, right? And the same thing with could, okay? In Spanish, you just take the verb to can or to be able to and then put it into the would tense. And so what's interesting is poder is to be able to. And so putting it into the would tense would make it would be able to. And what does could mean in English? Well, could is the same thing as saying would be able to, right? I could do it. I would be able to do it. They're the same thing, right? And so you can see, even though these are technically separate words, they still fall into the would tense because they're still would words, if that makes sense. They're still in the same tense, okay? So you can see that both here and here in the linguistics, okay? Next, we have the future tense, and most people know what the future tense is, but what I like to call it is what it actually is in Spanish, which is the will tense. And so you can see what this probably means. And so this is referring to, for example, I will speak. It is referring to will. That's it. And so it's referring to the future. I will, you will, he will, they will, whoever blank will do whatever verb. And one quick tip is that for both future tenses, so both the would tense and the will tense are future tenses, you will be adding to the verb in the ending. Just one quick tip. Now, let's talk about the two past tenses. Now, so far, it's been pretty simple, okay? You know, present, conditional, future, everyone sort of knows these. These next four, I literally didn't even know the technical terms for them, even when I was fluent in Spanish. Like, I only learned them now just because I've taught clients Spanish, okay? But like before that, I literally didn't even know that these existed, okay? And that's how you know how useless they are. So in Spanish, there are two past tenses. There's something called the preterite and the imperfect. Forget about them, okay? Because no one knows what imperfect means. No one knows what preterite means. What we can know is when they're used, and this is why I changed the names. So in Spanish, there are two past tenses. And when you're referring to a period of time in the past, if you think about time as like a timeline, right? When you are referring to a period of time, okay, where it starts and it ends in a period of time, that is when we use what I like to call the line in the past. And that is when the imperfect is used, okay? So the reason why I call it the line in the past is because I like to think about this line right here, right? We're talking about this line in the past. So that's when we used what is technically known as the imperfect. I call it the line in the past, okay? Because it's used in a period of time in the past, in a timeline in the past. And so in conjugation, this would look like hablaba, for example. Okay, and so this translates to I was or I used to blank verb. Because think about it, when you say I was or I used to, you're referring to a period of time in the past, right? And that is different to what is technically known as the preterite, which I like to call the point in the past, where you are specifically referring to one point in the past, one specific point, okay? And so that is where we have hablé, for example, and that means I spoke, okay? So notice the difference here. In English, when you say I was or I used to blank verb, you're referring to a period of time. Okay, and so that's when we use the line in the past, right? Whereas when you say I spoke, I use the direct past tense, okay? Or what is technically known as the preterite. What you're referring to is a point in time. And so that's why instead of referring to I was, I used to as the imperfect and I spoke as the preterite, let's just think about them exactly how they're used, which is that the imperfect is used time in the past or a line in the past, and the preterite is used in a point in the past. And so I just call it the line in the past and the point in the past. And so I'm telling you, I didn't even know that they were called imperfect and preterite. Like I didn't even know that for the longest time. Okay? But you don't need to know that. You just need to know that the line in the past refers to I was or I used to, and that the point in the past refers to I spoke or the direct point in the past. And so this matters because, for example, in English, we would say I was born. But think about it. Is you being born something that happens in a period of time in the past or a point in the past? Well, it's a point in the past, right? You don't celebrate your birthday through a period of time. Your birthday is one point. It's one day. And technically, it's not even 1 day. It's like 1 hour of a day, okay? And so there's a reason why birthdays don't last a week, because it's in a point in the past. And so technically, in English, why are we even using I was? We're supposed to say I borned, but that's wrong, right? And so this is why it's so important to understand this difference, okay? And so the preterite, aka the I spoke, etc., is used in the point in the past, and the imperfect, aka I was, I used to, is used in the line in the past, meaning a period of time in the past, okay? Finally, let's talk about the subjunctive and the imperative. Now, these two are probably the most complicated words that you never need to know, okay? They're also probably one of the hardest concepts in Spanish. When it comes to when to use them, I used to be so confused. Like I'm telling you, the subjunctive was probably one of the hardest things that I had to go through in learning Spanish. It's like the big dragon. But I'm not saying that to scare you, because I watched all these videos online and basically all of them confused me because they listed me tons of different examples instead of giving me the one rule. And that's what I'm going to give you now. So forget subjunctive and imperative. We're going to rename it into what I like to call the mood tense. And so the word mood is what the subjunctive and imperative is referring to. Mood. Okay. And you can see here that I didn't separate subjunctive and imperative. And the reason why is because there's only one difference. And the reason why is because there's just one difference. And in terms of conjugation, by the way, the subjunctive and imperative are the exact same. The only difference is one tiny exception. So don't separate subjunctive and imperative. They're both basically the same thing. And they both follow one overarching rule. And here it is. So just understand subjunctive as mood tense. Okay. And the mood we're referring to here is when something is an uncertainty / it has doubt, meaning it's not a fact. That is it. That covers every single use, basically every single use of the subjunctive and the imperative. Okay. So in Spanish, depending on what mood you want to give, okay, and this is why I call it the mood tense, depending on what mood you want to give or what vibe, if you want to use that word, you will use the subjunctive and the imperative, meaning you'll use the mood tense. And so a lot of times we want to say something in Spanish, or we want to make hypotheticals, or we want to talk about the future, but we're talking about the future, but we're referring to something in the future that is uncertain. That mood, that vibe, that occurrence is when we would use the subjunctive. And so mainly this refers to hypotheticals. So if I would have said, if I were to, okay, if I were to, and then blank sentence. That is fundamentally something that is not a fact. There is doubt, there's uncertainty, because I don't know that I'm going to do that. If I said, if I were to speak Spanish, me speaking Spanish is an uncertainty. It's not a fact. There's doubt in that, right? And so there's uncertainty in that, meaning we use the mood tense, or what is formally known as the subjunctive. Or for example, any time in Spanish you express a want or a desire, you will use the mood tense or the subjunctive. And the reason why is because every single time someone desires something, there is fundamentally, by definition, an uncertainty, a doubt, or a fact, okay? If I tell you, I want you to correct me, for example, you correcting me, I don't know if it's going to happen. And it definitely hasn't happened before, right? I'm expressing what I want you to do. And so in Spanish, if I said, quiero que me corrijas, And so I conjugated corrijas in the subjunctive there. Why? Because you correcting me has uncertainty and doubt to it. I don't know if you're going to correct me. I'm just saying that I want you to correct me, right? If I say I hope, I wish, I want, I desire to, etc., all these things, okay, me desiring them are facts, so they won't fall into the subjunctive. But whatever verb that comes after, whatever I want you to do, whatever I desire, whatever I wish, etc., is always going to be an uncertainty or have doubt because you don't know if that's going to happen, right? And so this same concept applies for the imperative. And the imperative is just the same thing. It's the mood tense, but it's referring to orders/demands. And so what you notice is orders and demands are the same reason for the mood tense. Because anytime I order you to do something, you doing that thing has uncertainty to it. It has doubt to it. It's not a fact. And so me telling you to speak, me telling you to shut up, me telling you to help me, you doing that action, doing that verb is not certain. There's doubt to it. And so you'll use the imperative in that case. Imperative and subjunctive are the same thing. The difference is just one is referring to orders and demands, the other is referring to subjunctive. And when the way you use pronouns are different in the imperative. If you want, I can create more videos very specific to imperative and subjunctive in the future. But this is the reason right here, okay? It is used in doubt or uncertainty, okay? And so one last example I'll give you is after we use in order to, okay? In order to in Spanish is para que. And anytime you say para que, in order to, any verb that comes after that, any action, will always be conjugated in the subjunctive. And the reason why is because anytime you say in order to, the thing that you're referring to is always uncertain. Think about it. I want to win in order to help you. Is me helping you an uncertainty? Well, yes, of course, right? Even if me winning is a certainty, like even me saying I'm going to win. Anytime you say in order to and then whatever verb, because you're saying in order to, you're adding a hypothetical, you're adding a stipulation, that automatically just makes it doubtful or make it have an uncertainty, right? Imagine you went up to a homeless person and said, I'm giving you this money in order to help you. You giving him the money is a certainty, right? You are giving him the money, right? But the second part, in order to help you, is you helping him confirmed? No, because he could just go buy alcohol with that money, right? And so many people online will just give you the reasons like, oh, hypotheticals, desires, after para que. I'm not trying to give you that BS because there's a long list of different examples of situations. In reality, they all, and I'm telling you this, for basically 99% of situations where the subjunctive and imperative are used, it is because of this right here, this overarching rule that applies to every single one. And so instead of memorizing all these different examples, just understand this. This is when the subjunctive and the imperative are used. And that is explanation of every single Spanish tense. I hope you enjoyed. Stay humble.